In the news, we're reading about nations being shaken. I mean, I think sometimes we're so narcissistically focused on the United States that we miss the fact that France just had a massive seismic shift in who's running the government, and that the right wing that was out is back in with greater influence. But at the same time, there was an almost toppling of a sheep nation, South Korea, as the president was virtually pulled out of office by a radical, progressive, communist Democrat movement in his own nation. And then the nation swung in mass protest and put him back in. But the most interesting one is the fall of Assad in Syria. Why? Because Daniel 8 prophesies that out of the fallen domain of Daniel's prophecy was Alexander's empire, that out of Syria would come the little horn that would come out of a period when there was great instability and treachery among the tribes. And that's exactly what's happening in Syria now. Could it be that the seeds of the end time, with Donald Trump in the United States and an Antichrist emerging in Syria, are happening right now? Don't say it's out of the question. We're living in a very unusual period of time. And I cover the biblical background of why Syria is something to keep an eye on and what's happening there right now. But, you know, in South Korea, it's so interesting. I'm heading there in December to go minister there with Cheon. And while I was there in my last trip, I got notifications from the women on my staff. Oh, when you go, check out the skincare products, because evidently South Korea has a cosmetic, foothold on the world right now in terms of hydrating, plant-based, nourishing skincare that causes a glow to your very skin. Then my wife goes over to buy stuff for the girls back home and finds Ramon. This is the product. And in it is like a 6 or 7 step process. I want you to look at my skin, ladies. Look at I don't want to tell you how close to 70 years old I am, but look at me with the glow of youth. You know why? My wife has me doing this routine. Gentlemen, you can do it. Doesn't attack your manhood. You can be a manly man and have radiant, fresh, hydrated skin. Anyway, I'm telling you, for these steps, it's a fast process. You go through their 7-step formula. They got 8 here because I guess they have an 8-step for when you go outside in the sun. But this is a powerful Christmas gift. I'm telling you, man, Annabelle's having parties all the time. I'm traveling with her, and, I do my ministry, and then there's like 8 or 10 women that want to have their makeover. This is the makeover of the century. So I encourage you, transform your skincare. Go to lancewallnau.com/Riman, R-I-M-A-N, and find out what the rage is in South Korea that has American women running over there to go get the product. You will not regret it. Get it for your husband. If you're tired of seeing that creases and crevices, this is the collagen cure that fills in all the lines. It's amazing. Transform your skincare. LanceWallnau.com/RIMAN. You'll be glad you listened to me. All right. Meanwhile, let's get into the collapse of the Middle East, shall we? By the way, people have been asking me, am I going to be involved with AmeriFest? Yes, I am. Maybe we could put this up there for folks. I'm confirmed as a speaker. Somewhere between December 19th and the 22nd, I'm going to be out there with all of the family. I think Bannon is out there, Pasopic's out there, a lot of regulars from the Real America Voice universe. And, of course, Charlie's there, Charlie Kirk. Anyway, I look forward to being there because I think there's a movement happening, not everywhere, but there is a sociologically verifiable turning of young men towards a conservative worldview. It's a muscular shift in the right direction, that there's a universe with order and cause and effect and consequences and reality, and we have to learn to work with it. And so there's something beautiful happening. I want to go out there and see what they're up to. In the meantime, here is a cartoon. Do you guys have that? I lost my sheet here. The cartoon on Syria. Let me get that cartoon out there. This is the Syria card. There you go. It's really a very witty. For those of you that are listening to the podcast, we've got Turkey in the middle with Erdogan with his guns pointing at Assad, who is out in Russia, but Russia is still there, and Saudi Arabia and Iran Both have, and they all have guns pointing at each other. And the Syrian army is the only one pointing its gun at its own head right now, because it's not sure what it's doing. Then there's Israel down there with his guns pointing at ISIL, which was ISIS, which is non-ISIL jihad, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Those guys change their names as frequent as Soros changes shell corporations for his money. So these are what you've got here is a real map of the the divided nations that are inside of Syria. Now, let's break this apart. You might have heard this. If you haven't, I think it's for your benefit historically that you hear the Prime Minister of Israel give his seasoned analysis of where we are, the dangers and the opportunities in Syria. Play video cut 1.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its oppression. But it also means we have to take action against possible threats. One of them is the collapse of the Separation of Forces Agreement from 1974 between Israel and Syria. This agreement held for 50 years. Last night it collapsed. The Syrian army abandoned its positions. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found. Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel.
You know, the problem with what's happening in Syria is you have, just think of ISIS winning. Well, they're a variation of ISIS in the Al-Qaeda camp. I mean, they keep on changing their names, but they're like the terrorist groups. They've just gained enough momentum to be able to kick Assad out and take over the capital. But now, in that sense, they don't necessarily have enough power to enforce their will upon all the territories. So you have a whole lot of carving up going on right now. So imagine this. Imagine the United States of America as consisting of South America, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, all in one geographic area. Just squish it. If there was no central control in Washington, you'd have the Canadians going to, mobilizing their Canadian geography. You'd have the Latino and the Hispanics mobilizing theirs. You have the Americans mobilizing theirs. And that's what's happening now. The country is being divided into regions that are ethnically, by language, by religion, by tribe, by history, having more in common. So they weren't able to cobble together the diversity into one united nation. So you've got what is being proposed is semi-autonomous cantons. So imagine like Switzerland. It has cantons, and these cantons are like, in the United States, it'd be like states, only far more independent, but they come together as Syria. Let me give you an idea of what that sounds like. So I'm studying this with you. There's the worries that 13-year-old civil war only deepened the sectarian divisions between the tribes. But there's a possibility that with these events, Iran's foothold in Syria will be gone, along with Assad, that among Tehran's most important regional clients, they've just lost their influence. And what remains is a loose confederation of 4 ethnic canons or substates. So they're all different communities in Syria that couldn't live together as one nation, but they could coexist in the geography of Syria as 4. Well, what would those 4 nations be? Well, One would be influenced by Russia. Russia built its air bases, its military bases. It doesn't want to leave them. And they're strong in Damascus, having to work out their coexistence there with, the new terrorist government. That'll be interesting. But Russia's there, and they want to stay there. The Kurds, who have U.S. air bases located with them near Turkey. Turkey isn't crazy about that. But there's the Kurds that are there. And now there is the Turkish interest. And the Turkish interest is going to be in a different part of the land. And they're going to be interested in forming their influence over the ports and the geography in the cities where the Turkish influence is the strongest. So I've given you Russia. I've given you this group that took over the country itself. This, and I'm not even sure what their name is yet. But then you've got the Turkish area. You've got the Kurdish U.S. area. You have Russia's interest in certain areas. So you see, what I'm talking about is that the model for its regional existence is going to be if they can do kind of what the Kurds did. Here's what the Kurds did. I remember being in Jerusalem when I met with many of the Kurds. We were praying for them, and Trump was taking a hard stand on them. We were hoping he'd lighten up because the Kurds have a lot of Christians, and the Kurdish Christians were the ones that took on ISIS and saved American lives. And they're more American, pro-U.S. in culture, in a sense, because of the Christian influence of the culture. But Trump didn't have a particular affection for them specifically. And so they weren't able to make the influence with him that I wish they could have had. But what happened in Kurdistan region of Iraq is they built a semi-autonomous administrative division in Iraq, meaning they carved out a territory. And they said, hey, here we have a dotted line. We're in Iraq, but leave us alone, buddy, because we've got a paramilitary democracy, and it's got an autonomous armed force, the Peshmerga, which are big fighters. And while remaining formally a part of the Iraqi Republic, having their political representative in the Iraqi Republic, they themselves have their own Kurdish region. So I'm trying to describe to you where the future is going. Now, the part that is disturbing to me as a student of the Bible is that Alexander the Great's empire was divided into 4 parts. And among the 4 parts, you have, the Egypt and the area of Syria constituting part of that breakup of his empire. Syria specifically is of interest because the Assyrian is one of the languages that's used for the emergence of this figure called the Antichrist. And it's been long believed, according to the prophecy of Daniel, that the little horn emerges out of one of the nations that was conquered by Alexander the Great. And it's written in Daniel that he proceeds out of one of the 4. So the question is, will it be Europe? Will it be Egypt? Will it be Syria? And the conjecture of scholars is the Assyrian language means the Antichrist eventually comes out of Syria. Now, I'm sharing that with you because in this period of history, what you're looking at is Israel punching back on Iran, Iran losing its toehold in Syria, Russia being stuck in a battle with Ukraine and having its resources ground up and tied up there. They can't impose their will in Syria. So now Assad in Syria has neither Iran nor Russia. Plus, Israel is degrading the power of Assad and his influence in Hezbollah and with Iran. So suddenly he becomes weaker, and boom. Doesn't surprise me to see him knocked out of power. Although it caught me, I wasn't predicting it. It makes total sense now because his proxies, his backers, Russia and Iran, are both being degraded militarily. So what this does is it creates instability in Syria, resentment, tribal warfare, all kinds of, now you're going to see tribe against tribe and people against people. It would be nice if they would all sit down like I just described and say, you've got this part and we've got this part and we'll do business with you. You do business with us. You've got agriculture. We got oil. This guy over here has something else. And they could kind of work like the United States, except in cantons rather than states. But that's not likely. Knowing the Middle East, they're going to be tribally at each other's throats. And out of that friction, Turkey is possibly going to align with Syria and become the emerging of a new caliphate, which is what Erdogan has always wanted. Global dominance for Islam with him as its head. He ain't going to be the Antichrist, but he's feeding that spirit. We'll be back in a second. Just want you to know, history's happening biblically while America's shaking and things are working here. Boom, a corresponding fissure or fault line just formed in the Middle East. And we want to talk about that. We'll be right back.
I'm excited to announce our Christmas extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. Our famous My Slippers, they haven't been on sale for over a year. Regularly $119.98, now only $59.98. Our 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with extremely limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list. Bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save on all MyPillow products. For example, flannel sheets for as low as $59.98, or our 6-piece towel sets, just $29.98. But that's not all. I'm extending our 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st of 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 or more ship absolutely free.
Go to MyPillow.com and use promo code Lance to save big on all of Mike's best products. That's promo code Lance.
Welcome back to the Lance Wallnau Show. Now listen, I know there are going to be those that are listening to me that are thinking, what's this program talking about? Look, on Real America's Voice, this will be airing on Sunday. So this is a Sunday sermon here. You should know your Bible. I have a degree in this Bible. I got did my master's degree in biblical studies. So I am interested when I read history. I look at current events in terms of the nations that are here now that are in the Bible. And I'm going to tell you something. Syria happens to show up. I just did an AI analysis of articles on the connection between Syria and the Antichrist in the end times. Listen to this. The idea that the Antichrist will be an Assyrian is a belief based on various Bible passages, including the vision of Balaam in the book of Numbers, also Psalm 83, and the writings of the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and Zechariah. Some books that discuss this belief include The Assyrian Antichrist by Roy Elmhorst, The Assyrian, Satan, His Christ, and the Return of the Shadow of Degrees, another book. These are interesting books. The Antichrist is initially called the king of Babylon, but he's referred to as the Assyrian in verse 25. And now look at this. In chapter 8 of Daniel, it refers to Alexander the Great's great kingdom being broken up into 4 separate parts. It was a vision of a goat with a horn in the middle of his head running up against a ram. And the goat is the king of Greece. It says in verse 21, the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Well, who was the first king of Greece with global power? It was Alexander the Great. This was written before he emerged. Why the Bible's so powerful. It's a prophetic book. So hundreds of years before Alexander the Great, Daniel is prophesying. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of that one nation. 4 kingdoms will come out of the empire of Greece, but not in his power. They will never, any one of them will ever achieve the exploits of Alexander the Great. However, in the latter times of their kingdom, those four nations that came out of Greece. And I think you might say it's Turkey, Syria, Egypt, and some other place, Iran. Obviously, Southern Europe, Greece, and Iran. But in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully. In other words, the argument is made that in the latter times of their kingdom, that is the kingdoms of these four nations, when the rebels have reached their fullness, and now you're at a point now where Assad is stepping down and rebels are taking over the country and tearing it apart in four different directions. There will be a ruler arising out of this chaos, will have a fierce countenance. And that Assyrian in the Bible is going to come out of the division of these nations that came out of Alexander. And out of that, I believe Syria is going to be preeminent. That's just because years ago it was on my radar. I looked at Syria all this time and said, I don't see anything happening there. So when something does happen in Syria, I go, uh-oh. I probably shouldn't tell you this because people will be poo-pooing it and critical of it, etc. But I'll throw it out there. I remember I was in Brazil 2 years ago. And obviously the people there, I was ministering there, I was talking there. And somebody leaned down over me while I was at an altar call. We were praying. And he leaned over and whispered something in my ear, and he spoke English. He said, I believe Donald Trump is going to be reelected to office. I believe that God is going to put him in order to give the world a period of stability. And I believe that once Donald Trump is no longer in office, you will see the beginning of the man of sin, and the lawless one will begin to arise, and lawlessness will be active on the earth. And I thought, how possible that Donald Trump would be a restraining force by the providence of God to set the world in a moment of stability in its present instability, but that once he's removed, the restraining force is removed, and anarchy, being pent up like a coiled spring, springs out into manifestation. Speaking of which, I warned you that if nations that are democracies with weak churches do not have strong churches that are engaging in prayer and intercession and in civic engagement and effective evangelism, if you're not occupying the territory God gave you spiritually, if you believe the Bible, now if you don't subscribe to this biblical worldview, then of course just dismiss what I'm saying. But if you call yourself a believer, then you know that I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Jesus says a strong, vibrant ecclesia, a body of believers, obediently doing what he calls them to do, will exert a restraining force upon lawlessness. And what you'll see is the emergence of stability, strength, prosperity in nations where the strong church is able to have institutional power and freedom. If they have freedom, they can proliferate and bring peace and structure to things. Now, in South Korea, they were once listed in the top 10 most poor nations in the world. Just look at North Korea. But then they embraced democracy, American institutions, and had Billy Graham and the Presbyterian Church, curiously enough, and the Baptists make it a missionary project in South Korea. And for the period of 1948 to like 1978, they went from being in the lowest 10% to being the 8th most prosperous nation in the world. Billy Graham had a powerful influence there. Evangelicals rose up and became prominent. Young Cho built the first 1 million member church, and with a 24-hour-a-day prayer gathering on a mountain called Prayer Mountain. But they did not have a vision for civic engagement. They were like we are in our weakened stupidity. They said, oh, we're not interested in natural secular things. We will change the world by praying and talking about Jesus. But they never went out and occupied newspapers. They never went out and built businesses that had economic roots in raising up education that would be teaching a biblical worldview. And the North Koreans and Chinese Communist Party began to infiltrate the universities, get into the media, get into the business, get into the government. And suddenly you had a free fall. Progressives started rising up and tearing the country apart. And if you take a look at this, they almost pulled the president out last week, who was a marginal conservative. I mean, he was elected by a 1% margin. But the president said, I am not being removed by the will of the people. I'm being removed by an orchestrated media assault with a mob that is trying to remove conservative leadership from the nation in order to turn this country into a pro-communist type democracy. You guys going to play that clip? Play it. Look at the size of this. So the conservatives got word and showed up to overturn the coup. They rose up in order to block the removal of the president. Look at the size of that gathering. Now, those aren't protesters. Those are supporters. If you could see this is massive, folks. Those of you who are on a podcast can imagine. It was an aerial view spanning blocks of humanity in all directions that were showing up to support the president because leftist progressives in South Korea don't have a Donald Trump. And I put this on my Twitter feed. You can go to the X feed at Lance Wallnau and see it. And what I said is they don't have a MAGA movement. They don't have a Donald Trump. And so the left-wing progressives thought they could coordinate a media moment with a false momentum to pull the president out of office and impeach him and his cabinet with like 20 charges of wrongdoing. But the people responded, much like in America. There's no news coverage of this, by the way. These are the sheep nations struggling to get on their feet. And this is the power of anarchy and lawlessness that is there. And I believe we're in a moment, beloved, when in the Middle East, you're seeing Israel strong and its enemies push back. Trump warned that they'll be held to pay for Hamas as they are right now negotiating lists of for hostage prisoner swaps. And what they're doing is they're desperate to try to get as many of these prisoners out as soon as possible because Trump has declared if those hostages aren't out by January 20th, he's coming after them. Now, Israel believes that 96 of the 251 hostages who were kidnapped on October 7th are still in Gaza, including the bodies of at least 34 confirmed dead by the Israeli defense. So we've got like 96 are still there. We have, I think there's 4 Americans there. And I was wondering when this was going to come to the surface. They made the mistake of taunting Trump with a pleading American. You know, the last thing you want to do is make Trump look weak or like you've got something on him. He's like an Old Testament king when he's gets flush in the face like that. So he will come after them. How he will do it, I don't know. But you know, the American military has a remarkable capacity, and they'll do what they have to do to get those hostages out. And they will do what they have to do. And I think Hamas realizes it would be in their best interest not to taunt Trump to show up. So they're going to try to settle this thing fast. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, you've been watching her. She's after the rebel victory in Syria over the Assad regime. She is really having a lot of focus on her because she was told that she was accused of being pro-Assad. So she's facing renewed scrutiny over that. And we're at a time when all of Trump's cabinet are going to be key players at some moment. Every one of them is going to be a front page story because history is going to challenge each of them. Keep praying for them. Keep standing together. You're in the most exciting country in the world and the most exciting time of history in your life. And it's a joy to be able to navigate through these subjects every day with you. I'm Lance Wallnau, signing off. God bless you.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.